Good evening. Thank you all for taking in the time to be with us this evening. I would like to especially welcome many of our friends who have joined from outside WCC. I see a couple of our friends who are from Gulf and US and some other places too. We especially appreciate your time in being with us. So a couple of months we have been discussing on each month what topic to take up. And we as a youth core, when we were analyzing the need, we definitely found that we all work in the marketplaces in your universities, in different companies. And at times it's so easy for us to get lost in the mundane of our work with our goals, our targets, and the work and the projects, whatever we are into. And we just get drifted away. And we just probably become like any other secular person who is chasing the worldly goals. But God has a very specific and a unique purpose in placing us in so many companies that we represent, that we are in today, and so many universities that many of our college friends are joining in from. And it's important that we identify and we understand the significance of God's purpose in we being in that office or that university. It's just not about getting that paycheck or looking for that promotion. God has something beyond that. So a couple of months before, one of my friends shared a video link of Ruben, and that's when I was so excited to see and hear what God was doing to Ruben. Ruben is the CEO of a US-based financial consulting company called Even Asset Management. The company was started in 2008. I love the vision that they put as investing that makes the world rejoice. Ruben's company strongly believes in Christian financial principles while they consult and provide financial advisories and ensure that whatever consultation and financial wealth management that they do is strongly biblical based. And he's been very strongly advocating Christian principles and values in different forums in many settings. And it's been some of us who are from financial sector have been following with him in LinkedIn, and I know we have been exciting to hear the kind of strong values that he holds up in the industry. And it's our prayer that through the session today that God would speak into us. So Ruben would be talking a bit about his personal life and how the company started and what are the personal significances that we can see on how the company is running. And also he would definitely take us today on our theme that we have talked today about our purpose in the marketplace. Let's all tune in, and we would, if any one of you are new to WCC, we would again welcome you to the fellowship that's happening today evening. And over to Ruben, looking forward to hear from you. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Jobin. Let me share my screen, and then we could go through. I put this presentation together last night, and I apologize about my voice as well. My family have 3 children. Everybody has a cold, and kept me up most of the night. Yeah, I'm just so happy to be with all of you. Thank you, Jobin and Rijo and others for inviting me. And so happy to see my my sweet cousin, Shubra. She's a part of your church, and I see that she's online here as well. And she's actually my niece, my first cousin's daughter. So I will speak a little bit about thinking about work and thinking about marketplace ministry, but even broader than that, thinking about work and our purpose as we think about, how should we think about our work as Christians? And I'll also share a little bit of my story, how I got into I'm one of the 2 people that started Eventide, and it really started with us praying for 6 months and asking God for a purpose. And I had no idea what God would do with that prayer. And today it's been 13 years, and today we're managing about $10 billion, almost $10 billion, which which we could not have imagined when we started. And um, and God has given us a platform for being able to share biblical truths to Christians and non-Christians through this company. And we have Christians and non-Christians as employees, as well as customers. Most of our customer base is financial advisors in America, and so we're able to lead with our mission. Our mission statement is Eventide strives to honor God and serve its clients by investing in companies that create compelling value for the global common good. And our tagline is investing that makes the world rejoice. Jobin mentioned that a little while ago. Some of you might know where that comes from. And normally I would ask you to raise your hand or guess, but I'll just tell you, in Proverbs, and I have I'm going to go through a presentation with all of you soon. In the book of Proverbs, there is a Bible verse that says, when the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. But when the wicked prosper, the people groan. And there's also another verse in Proverbs that says, when the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. And when the wicked are defeated, the people shout for joy. Why is that? It's because when the righteous prosper by taking care of the city, by taking care of the poor in the city. And the wicked often prosper through exploitation, through plunder. And so when the wicked prosper, the people groan. And we'll get into some of those examples. And when the wicked are defeated, there are shouts of joy. So even the world wants to see the righteous prosper, because as the righteous prosper, the whole world is able to prosper. Christians, as we prosper, we should not only be generous through our wealth and through our profits, but we should be thinking about how our work in itself can be a blessing to our community and can be a blessing to our society and our country and the whole world. So let me just stay focused and go through this presentation. I'll try to wrap up in 45 minutes, and then we will have question and answer, a time for that. And so I think it's 7:53 my time. So for you guys, is that I'm assuming it's like 6:23 p.m. Okay, good. Okay. So let me go through this. So my background already, I talked about it, and Jobin mentioned it as well. So I want to start off with a Bible verse from Matthew chapter 5, verses 14 to 16. This is coming from the Sermon on the Mount. Jesus said, "You are the light of the world. A town or a city built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on its stand, and it gives light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works, your good deeds, and glorify your Father in heaven." This is true of everything that we as Christians should be doing and be thinking about in terms of our life. Let the world see our good works, our good deeds, and glorify the Father in heaven. And I think this is especially true of the marketplace, especially true as we are thinking about how we go about our work, how we go about our education. Many of you are still in college, in universities, and so this is especially true for us who might not be in full-time ministry and might not be pastors of churches, but wherever we are planted, we must flourish and we must be a light, and the world should see that light and they should glorify our Father in heaven. So what is a marketplace? I wanted to just start off with that. What is a marketplace? And this is just a basic definition. A marketplace is a place where goods and services are sold, where goods and services are bought so that the community can flourish. It's a place where the community is flourishing because physical and material needs of the people are being met. Often, I think as Christians, when pastors are preaching, we only focus on the spiritual part of a person, but God cares about the physical. God cares about the material needs of people all around the world. And this is especially true of India, where so many people are suffering because they don't have food, they don't have shelter. And so as Christians, we should be thinking about the work we do, whether you're a doctor, whether you're a nurse, whether you're an engineer. I'm even thinking about this right here. The fact that we could be on Zoom, I could be here, and I could be talking to all of you. I know that when I first moved to the US, this was in 1988, well before many of you were born. I turned 8 the day I moved to the US. And on my 8th birthday, we landed here in New York, and I've lived in Boston, Massachusetts ever since. When we moved here, I was a kid. I had no idea how much my life would change. And I grew up with my grandparents and Shubra's great-grandparents. And I slept in the same bed with my grandfather for the first 8 years of my life. And because my brother and me slept in the same bed with my grandfather. And my grandmother slept on the bed right next in the same room. And I had no idea that I would lose touch with them. My parents, when we moved to the US, they were struggling. It was very difficult time. They were not making a lot of income, and I know that they would call India and speak to my grandparents, and the calls would be really short. And because of the cost of the telephone calls, the children didn't get much time or any time to talk to our grandparents. And now I think, man, like we could be for free connecting to the internet, talking to one another, and seeing people face to face. Imagine if this technology existed 20 years or 30 years ago. I would have had a much better relationship with my grandparents even after I left Kerala. So human beings are creating material goods that are a blessing, and many of you are in engineering. And let's not look down on our professions. Oftentimes, what happens is that there is a sacred and secular divide where we think that if we're not called into full-time ministry, God does not care about our work. If we're not a pastor, God does not care about our work. And then we feel like we are second-class citizens in God's economy, in God's kingdom. But I want to show you from the Bible that God cares deeply about work, and that God cares deeply about using our human labor, human work, to bring blessing to the world. So the marketplace is also a forum through which economic commerce is conducted and where wealth is created. It's not, when we are buying and selling goods and services, even as we participate in the stock market, it is not like gambling. Economic activity is very different. It's a win-win situation often. It should not be a win-lose situation. So as you are purchasing bread from a local store, that baker, that farmer, that storekeeper, every single part of that supply chain has been blessed in that process. Value has been created, and you have been blessed at the same time, right? Wealth has been created, and all the people in that supply chain has been blessed, and value has been created, including yourself as a customer. When we invest in companies, we are providing capital to the company. And we do that for two reasons. One, I think most Christians only think in terms of providing capital to companies so that our capital can grow, so that we can make more money. But we should also think about investing as supplying capital to companies that we want to partner with. What are the companies that we want to see existing in the world? What are the companies that are blessing humanity? And we should not be supplying capital to the companies that are hurting humanity. And there are lots of examples of that, whether it's tobacco or abortion or human trafficking, pornography. There are lots of things that Christians unknowingly in the stock market even are investing in that are, I would say, very hurtful to God's heart. Because through our investments, we're promoting the things that God hates. And we should rather be promoting the things that God loves and that pleases God. Third definition, it's not a definition, I just made a comment here. The marketplace exists in every single part of the world throughout history. It touches every person, regardless of culture, nationality, or religion. You can just step outside your house, your church, marketplace is right there. You'll see it everywhere. Whether you're in a communistic government, whether you're capitalistic, whether you're in India, Argentina, US, it doesn't matter. Whether you live in the time of Abraham, you see Abraham transacting economically and trading with people that he runs into throughout his life. Examples of a marketplace. I mentioned Lakshmi Road. If you go to any big Indian cities, there's a Lakshmi Road in India. Lakshmi in India is the goddess of money. So unfortunately, this is true all over the world. The marketplace has become controlled by the world. What God has designed and formed in the Bible for good is often being used to plunder and to exploit God's people and God's creation. When I say God's people, it's also Christians and non-Christians, God's creation. I remember one time when I worked in 2005, 2006, I was working in Pune. I worked for a company called Bank of New York Mellon. And I was, living there for a year, helping the company outsource to India. And as I lived there, I remember my colleagues taking me to a place called Lakshmi Road in Pune. And it was in the evening, and I couldn't believe the amount of young girls that were being sold in the marketplace. And they were just lining up on like the streets. And so the world often seeks to use the marketplace to exploit the poor and to make a profit through plunder. And the Bible has so much to say about that, and I will get to that soon. All through the Bible, all through the history, in ancient Greece, there's a place called the Plaka, where it was in Athens, where the market actually, for my 10-year wedding anniversary, I took my wife to Athens, and we just, saw, we walked through the marketplaces there. It's incredible. There are different types of marketplaces, right? Wall Street and stock markets all over the world is an example of the financial marketplace. In Tokyo, you have the Ginza. You have online marketplaces. You have things like Amazon, eBay, Facebook Marketplace. So more and more online marketplaces. You have stores and malls all over the world. I think in Dubai, I think it's called the Lulu Mall or something, right? There's a huge mall that's famous. And of course, all of us, or many of us, are born in Kerala. I'm born in Kerala. I remember I would walk with my grandfather from my house to the Chanda to buy fish market, and to buy some vegetables. So all over the world. I remember, being in Tanzania twice with Shubra's dad, Sajuchayan, and just walking through the marketplaces in Tanzania, fish marketplaces and different places like that, and passing out tracts. All over the world, marketplaces exist. So how should Christians approach the marketplace? We should approach the marketplace really in two ways. And I think oftentimes we only think about the second bullet point here, and I want to talk about both. So one, by creating goods and services that honor God and allow the community to flourish. As Christians, we should not be engaged in like subprime mortgages or payday loans where we're trying to exploit the poor. A poor person needs 100 rupees to live. We should not be giving them 100 rupees and asking for 500 rupees tomorrow as interest. And the Bible talks a lot about exploitation through interest. We should be creating goods and services, whether it's banking, whether it's technologies, whether it's nursing, whether you're working in utilities and the industrial space, whether you're working to create food, whether you are running a restaurant, whether you are working in agriculture, whether you're making fertilizers for farmers, whatever you're doing, we should be thinking about our work as creating goods and services that honor God and allow our community to flourish. And two, we should be witnesses of God's love, witnesses to Jesus in the marketplace. And I want to spend a little bit of time on both of these. On the first one, creating goods and services that allow your community to flourish. Goods must be good. That's where the word comes from. We are providing something that's good for humanity. And a service must be served. We must be serving our community. The greatest commandment in the Bible is to love God and to love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus said that all the commandments in the Old Testament are hang on these two commandments: to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Later in Galatians chapter 5, we read that all the commandments are summed up in that one commandment: to love your neighbor as yourself. That's what Paul says. Then later in James, it says that the love your neighbor commandment is the royal law of Scripture. So we should be living our lives to love God and to love our neighbor. Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, be blameless. This is not from Matthew, is it? I think I got the verse wrong here. This comes from Paul, actually. we have to correct this. If anybody remembers, is it Hebrews? This verse, this does not come from Matthew, I don't think. Be blameless and innocent, children of God, without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation, among whom you shine as lights in the world. Hold on one second. I got the reference here wrong on this one.
I think Philippians 2:15.
Philippians 2:15, yes. So it comes from Paul in Philippians. So I'll have to fix this. I was working on this last night. Okay, so as we think about our work, and I want to go back to creation, the book of beginnings. And God is a creator, God is a worker. So this is one big difference in the Bible within the Christian worldview than with any other world religion. In Hinduism, right, we're all familiar with Hinduism. In Hinduism, you have the untouchables, right, at the bottom of the work ladder, and they do the dirty work. And then as you move up, you're doing more dignified work by worldly standard. And then at the very top of that ladder is the Brahmins, who don't do any work. They're the priestly class. And the whole goal of Hinduism is to escape work and to go into a state of moksha. And in Buddhism, we all know it's called nirvana. And so this idea of like this work cycle and ultimately escaping work, where Hindus want to reincarnate and come back and do a better form of work, and eventually be in a state of be a priestly class where you don't do physical work, and then you eventually do no work at all in the state of moksha. When you look at Greek mythology, it was very similar. The views on work. When you look at most world philosophies and religions, that's the view of work. But when it comes to Christianity, work is honored and affirmed by God. And all work that is a blessing to humanity, that is loving our neighbors, is affirmed by God. So when God is creating in Genesis, and we know that Jesus came as a carpenter onto this earth. He could have just come as a king. He could have just come as a priest. And we know he's our king and high priest that intercedes for us. But we know that Jesus came as a carpenter. So work was not beneath Jesus. And when God creates in Genesis 1, after everything he creates, he says, it is good, it is good, it is good. And in the sum of all creation, he calls good everything he created in Genesis 1:31. We know that God creates humanity in his image. We are image bearers of God. But in Genesis, what does that mean? What do we know about God's image? We don't know a lot, actually. But we do know that God is working. And then ultimately that God is resting. So as people that are made in God's image, we are created to work. And God, a lot of people think that work is a result of the fall, but God gives humanity work before the fall happens. What happens at the fall is that work becomes toilsome and laborsome and painful. But there is meaning in work that God gives to human man and woman prior to the fall. So that's just something that a lot of people don't understand as they think about work. So God created humanity in his image in order to partner with God in his great work of creation and redemption. So I'm not going to read the verses, but feel free to refer to Genesis chapter 1, verses 26, 27, and 28. This is pretty fascinating. In Genesis chapter 2, verse 5, there's a verse that says that shrubs could not appear on the earth and plants could not spring up until two things happened. One, until God could cause the rain to fall. That makes sense to us, obviously. Without rain, how can plants spring up on the earth? But then there's a second part to that verse that says, until God had created humans to till the ground and to work the ground, he did not cause the shrubs to appear and plants to grow. So we get to partner with this creation and work. So all the medical advances, all the technological advances, imagine if Abraham or Moses walked into our life today and saw how we lived, that we're traveling by planes and cars, and we're able to swipe on a phone and go from one app to the next app. We're able to do video phone calls and see across the other side of the world. They would not have imagined this. This is just crazy. But God has given us the ability as human to be innovating and to be taking what he has created and to further that creation in order to bless humanity. Many Christians in America within the faith and work conversation call that co-creation, taking what God has created and building on that. We don't build from a vacuum, but we build on what God has given us in terms of raw materials that he has placed on the earth. So in all of our work, we should be thinking, how are we partnering with God's intent? In all of our work, we should be thinking about, what is the purpose of this work? If God were doing this work, what would God's intent be? Some of it might be easy. If you're a nurse or a doctor, that answer might be easy. But for some of us, if you're banking, you should be asking yourself, what is God's original intent for banking? If God were sitting in my shoes today, how would God do this work? How would God think about how I could love my neighbor in this work and create value and human flourishing through this work? I mentioned this verse earlier. All of the work that we do should lead to human flourishing. When the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. So as you all prosper in your work, the city should be rejoicing, because your work should be honoring to God and loving to your neighbor. And as the wicked perish, there are shouts of joy. Here's another verse in Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 7. But seek the welfare of the city. I would say seek the welfare of the company that you're placed in, where I have sent you, and pray for the Lord on its behalf. For in its welfare, you will find your welfare. God is speaking to the exiles in Jeremiah chapter 29, verse 7. And I mentioned this earlier, Galatians 5:14. For the whole law is fulfilled in one word: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There are warnings in the Bible about following the world's framework for business and work generally. This was a passage in the Bible that convicted me, Proverbs chapter 1, verses 1 to 10, when I was starting Eventide, along with my friend Finney. My son, if sinful men entice you, do not give in to them. If they say, come along with us, let's lie in wait for innocent blood. Let's ambush some harmless soul. We will get all sorts of valuable things and fill our houses with plunder. Cast lots with us. We will share the purse. My son, do not go along with them. Do not set foot on their paths, for their feet rush into evil. They are swift to shed blood. Such are the paths of all who go after ill-gotten gain. It takes away the life of those who get it. As I was starting an investment firm, I thought to myself as I was reading these verses, we will get all sorts of valuable things. We will get all sorts of profits we will get all sorts of capital gains and fill our houses with plunder. And in India, I don't know if you have 401k plans and IRAs, I don't know what you call that, but fill our bank accounts with plunder, fill our retirement accounts with plunder, cast lots with us, invest with us. This is what the world would be saying. You know, we're investing in tobacco, making lots of money, exploiting the poorest children in the world. Invest with us. We will share the purse. Some translations say we will share the common purse. A mutual fund is a common purse. You know, many people invest in one mutual fund together and we all share in the profits together. But the Bible says, do not go along with such people. I do want to remind you that our work is a blessing that God has given us. And even wealth creation is a blessing that God has given us. Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 18 says, to remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the ability to produce wealth, and so confirms his covenant, which he swore to your ancestors as it is today. There are lots of warnings against following the world's framework for business. Here are just some verses from 3 different chapters in the Bible. In Malachi, God says, I will come to you in judgment. I will be quick to testify against those who practice sorcery, divination. Like, that makes sense to us, right? Those who commit adultery, God will come to them in judgment. That makes sense to us. Those who break promises, that makes sense. But look at this next one. Those who exploit their workers. So as you're working, wherever you're placed by God, are you exploiting your coworkers? Are you exploiting those that report to you? Are you loving them and taking care of them? Are you working them late nights so that they cannot be home with their families, with their children? Are they able to have family prayer every night with their families? Are you exploiting your workers? Are you paying them fairly? And then it goes on to say, exploit their workers, the widows, the orphans, and those who refuse to help the immigrant. And in this way, they show that they do not fear me, says the Lord, who rules over all. In Isaiah chapter 58, verse 3, God says, why have you fasted? Well, the people will say, why have we fasted? They say, and you have not seen it. So they're talking to God. Why have we humbled ourselves and you have not noticed? But then God is saying, yet on the day of your fasting, you do as you please and exploit your workers. So especially those of us who are in positions of power, this is a warning to us. Do not exploit our workers and those that report to us. And again, those of us who are investing in companies and profiting, we should be looking to see how are the companies loving their customers and their employees, their workers, and are we profiting? Is the company increasing the profit and the dividends by underpaying their employees? If that's the case, we should not. That's stealing from that employee in order to fatten my investment profit. That's not fair. There's so many scriptures in the Bible that talk about this. I want to give you an example from the life of David. Many of you may know when David, towards the end of his life, he is hiding from the Philistine army in the cave of Adullam. And as he is in that cave hiding, he says, oh, I wish I had water from this well in Bethlehem. So there's a specific well that David likes to drink water from. And the Bible says that his mighty men run through the Philistine army, get the water, and they bring it back to him. But David pours the water in front of his men, and he says, I cannot drink this water. I cannot drink the blood of my men, is what he says. I can't imagine that his men would actually give their king blood to drink. I don't think they would have given him that water. But David sees blood because David knows the risk that his men took in order to bring the water to him. So let me give you some examples. The next country over in China, and by the way, there's exploitation all over India, and all over the world. But let's take China. In Western China, like which is pretty close to India, there's a group called the Uyghur people. These are basically Muslims that live in China. The Chinese government is trying to convert them and is putting them into concentration camps and forcing them to putting them into slave labor. And many times when the men are in these concentration camps, the women are being raped by the soldiers. And these men are being forced to work in jobs that these are in companies that are serving as the supply chains to large Western and Eastern Fortune 500 type companies, very large companies, are outsourcing to these companies that are exploiting these men by putting them into these concentration camps and forcing them to work. It's forced labor. And yet, many people all over the world are profiting from this. A couple of years ago, there was a situation where there were Chinese companies that would put these safety nets, and you could Google it and read about it, around the company, because people would go to the top of the company and jump down to commit suicide because the company was forcing them to work 36, 46 hours straight without any rest. And people would just go crazy and commit suicide. So the company had to put nets around the building to catch people as they were falling. As people that are called by God, when we see abuses, we should call it out. And we should be people that are building companies that are taking care of the poor, not exploiting the poor. In James, in the New Testament, there's a verse, look, the wages you failed to pay the workers who mowed your fields are crying out against you. The cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord Almighty. Jobin, how much longer do we have? I'm sorry. You're mute. You're mute.
You can take time to complete. Can go around
Sorry?
15. You can take time to complete. We'll have another 15 minutes.
Another 15 minutes. Okay, perfect. Okay, so I wanted to, in these last few slides, show you that that God cares deeply about work in itself, that we should be working. We should be asking, if I'm a doctor, how am I serving the Lord in my work? If I am an engineer, like what is God's original intent and purpose for engineering? God saw all of this in creation, but all of these things could be used to love our neighbor or to exploit our neighbor. So how's our work that we do? As we think about our education, you should be thinking about that. How's the work that we're going to do 5 years from now? How are we able to love our neighbors through our work? The second component of work is to serve as witnesses to Jesus, right? The marketplace is a forum where philosophical discussions take place. Therefore, it is a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to serve as witnesses for Jesus. Here's an example in the Bible. Paul, when he's in the Athens in Acts chapter 17, we read that Paul preaches about the unknown God on the Mars Hill. And actually, when I went to Athens with my wife, I remember standing there, you could see where Paul preached. It's a small hill, but on the next hill is where like the temple for Zeus is, and all the temple of the gods. So you could see where Paul preached if you stand where all those temples are. But before Paul even gets up there and starts preaching about the unknown God, we see that Paul is walking around in the marketplaces. And the Bible says, while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was greatly distressed to see the city full of idols. So he reasoned in the synagogue with both Jews and God-fearing Greeks, as well as in the marketplace, day by day, with those who happened to be there. Acts chapter 17, verses 16 and 17. So the marketplace is a place of conversation. It's a place where people are debating. It's a place where philosophical conversations are happening. For most of us, we have the ability to impact people with God's word way more than our pastors do in our churches. Our pastor's role should be to equip each and every one of you so that you can be witnesses in the marketplace. You are daily spending time with non-Christians. You are daily working with your coworkers, with your bosses, with your people that report to you, your subordinates in your workplace, who know you as a Christian. It's a great opportunity to be a witness, not just in what they see, but also in what they hear from you. So be witnesses for Jesus in the marketplace, in your workplace. And as I said, we often think, oh, this is the role of the pastor. But the pastor does not have the relationships that you have. The pastor is not spending 10 hours a day, Monday through Friday, with non-Christians the way that you are. You are the evangelist. You are the ones that are called into the marketplace, not your pastor. Your pastor's role is to equip you so that you could be witnesses in the marketplace. Your coworkers are your mission field. It is the best opportunity to build trust with non-Christians, to serve as a public witness, and to share the news about Jesus. If you build a successful business, you will have the opportunity to speak to the masses of customers, employees, and even world leaders as your platform, your business gets bigger and bigger. Use your business as a platform for sharing God's love. So in the next 10 minutes, I'll just share with you my story real quickly, and then we can wrap up and then have Q&A. So I mentioned I was born in India, and in 2007, I lost a job, and I started to pray. And at the time, I was praying to God to take me into the mission field. And I was praying that God would show me his will. And I remember praying, God, if you want to take me to any part of India, Africa, South America, it doesn't matter. But I want to know that you are leading me, Lord. I want to know that for sure. I'm born and raised in a Pentecostal background, right? So all the testimonies we hear in our churches, people are saying, well, God spoke to me in this way. God told me to do this. I said, God, I don't want to do something and follow my own desire and think it's coming from you. I want to know this is really coming from you. And whatever that is, if I know I'm in God's will, I know I'm successful. If I could be the most successful person by worldly standards, but if I'm outside of God's will, I'm a failure. So I started praying and asking God to show me his will. So in a way, I felt like Joseph in the pit, because Joseph had a lot of dreams. And for me, I went through I'm not going to get too much into detail for time, but I went through a phase in my life where I just felt like I was an utter failure. I felt like I had all these dreams for God, but I didn't feel that I was succeeding at those dreams, and I didn't feel that. And I started questioning whether God even wanted me to do anything for God. So I started praying. So this was the house my parents. So this is kind of hard for you to understand in India, but in America, underneath the house, there's something called a basement. And the basement is like you dig the foundation deep, especially in the Northeast. In Texas, they don't have these as much in the South. But underneath the basement is like where the foundation is, and that's where the heating system for the whole house upstairs is. The heating system, the water boilers, and everything. So this right here is a washing machine and dryer, obviously. So that was in the basement. So I didn't want my parents to see or anybody to see me praying and crying to God. And so I would go to the basement late nights. I would sit there and just cry and pray and ask God to show me what God wants me to do with my life. And ultimately, these were the passages that really convicted me in my prayer. Psalm 1 and Romans 12. And just to summarize, Psalm 1 talks about, as you all know, the person who is righteous and faithful. He will be like a tree planted by streams of water. In all that he does, he prospers. The wicked are not so, but they are like the chaff that the wind blows away. Romans 12 says, do not be conformed any longer to the patterns of the world, but be transformed by the renewal of your mind, so that you may test and approve what God's will is, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. The whole passage goes on to say, our love must be sincere, hate what is evil, cling to what is good. So that was my prayer. God, whatever I do, I want to think differently. I want to not conform to the patterns of the world, but I want to have a transformed mind so that I could serve you and honor you and please you in whatever you call me to do. Ultimately, I started this company Eventide with my friend Finney. I read these verses already, so I won't go back into this. Proverbs chapter 1. And this was an example that really bothered me as I was starting Eventide. In the last 100 years, in the world, 100 million people have died from tobacco use. In the next 100 years, 1 billion people are expected to die from tobacco use. And when you go to places like Indonesia and Papua New Guinea, 65% of boys and 40% of girls ages 13, 14, 15 are addicted to cigarettes. It's a huge problem in the world, especially in the developing world. And when I often talk to American Christians, I say, well, you're profiting from this unknowingly, because all of your 401k plans, your IRAs, if you look at the top holdings, your American portfolio managers are investing. Often in America, the top holdings tend to be tobacco companies, because tobacco, they have loyal customers. Their customers are addicted. And so these companies pay out large amounts of dividends and profits back to shareholders. So I often tell American Christians, you're profiting from these little children that are being exploited by large tobacco companies. In India, the big tobacco companies, British American Tobacco. So these were just the things that I decided, along with Finney, the things that we would avoid investing in. We don't want to profit from these things as Christians. Abortion, alcohol, exploiting even animals, gambling, tobacco, environmental harm. It's not on here, but yeah, there were just a whole list of things. So we were starting our company and our first fund, our mutual fund, on July 1, 2008. As we were praying, God started opening doors for us. So this man, Tim Weinhold, showed up at our church 2 weeks prior to us launching. So Finney and I had started a church together, a house church. Finney went to Harvard, MIT, and I went to Tufts University. So a lot of students would come to the house church. So Finney and I were leading together, along with my brother, Sony. And Tim one day Googles house churches in Cambridge and shows up at our house church. And it was Tim, the 2 weeks before we started our company. He had never been to a house church in his life. He's from Seattle, other part of the side of the country. He comes to our house church. Somehow he Googles house churches in Cambridge. The world may say it's a coincidence. I truly believe that God brought Tim to the house church. So Tim said, I know what a Christian is. I know what a mutual fund is. Put that together for me. And we said, we're going to avoid investing in all of these things. Tim said, that's all great. But have you considered what is God's purpose for investing? What is God's intent for business? If you're investing in businesses, what are the types of businesses you should be investing in? And so we ultimately came up with this list and said, well, the greatest commandment in the Bible is to love your neighbor as yourself. So let's invest in businesses that are loving and serving their customers, employees, supply chain, host communities, environment, and society. I mentioned love your neighbor as yourself. So as I wrap up, I'll just say that the word Eventide, the name of our company, is special to us for many reasons. Eventide, Jesus said, and Eventide means evening in Old English. Jesus said, as long as it is day, we must do the works of him who sent me. Night is coming when no man could work, no one could work. I think of eventide as evening tide. The idea that when the evening tide comes in, the fishermen have to stop their fishing and they have to come in and rest. And they work all day, and when the evening tide comes in, work is done. There's an old English hymn that says, fast falls the eventide, abide with me. The night is coming. We have limited time here on the earth. The night is coming. We must do God's will while there is still time on the earth. Eventide. Indian connection to eventide. Mahatma Gandhi's favorite hymn was Eventide. It was Mother Teresa's favorite hymn as well. It was sung at her funeral. In fact, many of you may know that recently, until recently, this song was even played in the Indian Republic Day to honor Mahatma Gandhi. So you could go on YouTube and play Abide With Me or Eventide Indian Republic Day, and you could see the videos of the Indian Army marching to this song. But I think recently Modi had the song removed from the Republic Day. We named our first fund the Eventide Gilead Fund. Gilead means mountain of witness, hill of testimony in Hebrew. I wanted this company that we're starting to become a mountain of witness and a hill of testimony. Our purpose statement is Eventide strives to honor God and serve its clients by investing in companies that create compelling value for the global common good. I mentioned our tagline, investing that makes the world rejoice. I just wanted to put this, I got this email recently from Sherry. Sherry is our marketing director in our company. She wrote, Robin, it's amazing what God has done. And that is my testimony. It's amazing what God has done through that prayer and through Eventide. God is using us in so many ways now, and I'm just so thankful. Just to give you some examples, even last week, Dr. Ben Carson, who many of you might know, he ran for president of America, of the US. He called me a few times, and I just had the opportunity to get on a podcast and explain what we do on his podcast. And then, in January, I have an opportunity to go speak to, business people, even in Switzerland, 2 different times. One is connected to the World Economic Forum, actually. So something that started small, where where we started with prayer, just wanting to honor God and serve Him and to love Him. And I was praying about, God, if it's ministry, if it's missionary work, whatever, just make it clear to me what you want me to do. God ultimately gave Finney and me this vision for starting Eventide, an investment firm that honors God. And God has allowed us to create a platform where we could share God's word and God's love to so many people in both in America as well as the world. So that is my testimony. So thank you for listening.
Thanks, Ruben. We have got a couple of questions in Pigeonhole. Before I would go there, I just want to just take a minute to ask anyone on the floor if you want to unmute us, just give the ability for participants to unmute. If anyone of you wants to unmute and ask a question directly, please feel free. Else we would just go about the questions that have come in Pigeonhole. Richard, I hope we have unmuted, given the option to unmute. Okay, good. Okay, listen, can you share the screen?
Sure, yeah, I'll do that.
Okay. So the first question we have is, has Eventide faced backlash or pressure from activist group or government agencies for standing up by Christian values on gender and sexual identity when it comes to employment?
Very good question. We have been very careful to be winsome and loving in how we talk about our values. And so when it comes to abortion or sexual identity, one of the things that I don't do is I don't discriminate based on these things when I hire people. I make it very clear what Eventide's purpose, what our mission, and what our values are in the hiring process. But I want all people to be able to have the opportunity to prosper through Eventide. And but I'm very clear what our mission and values are. So if a company is promoting abortion through giving to Planned Parenthood, if a company is promoting views on sexuality in a way that is unfair to the Christian view, we call that the corporate discrimination screen at Eventide. I'm very open with that with employees as well as with our customers. But the way that we talk about it is winsome and loving, and so therefore we've been able to avoid a lot of backlash. So what I often say to people is that we want companies to be fair to all people. We want companies to be loving and fair to people of faith, their Christian employees, as well as their non-Christian employees. So as a company comes up with their HR policies, the companies that we're investing in, we want the companies to be extremely mindful and loving and fair of the Christians and the people of faith that work in the company. So our language is more a language of inclusion and not exclusion. So that really does help us to win people.
Thanks. So, our clients are averse to investing when they see that Eventide had an added emphasis on investing with Christian values instead of just focusing on high ROI.
Yes, to an extent, yes. Even with Christians, sometimes I get feedback that all they care about is to make the most amount of returns. So sometimes Christians will say to me, just make me all the money you could possibly make for me, and I'll be generous. I'll give to charities. But John Wesley, what I say to them is that John Wesley, the founder of the Methodist Church, preached, make all you can to give all you can, but make all you can without hurting yourself or your neighbor in body or in soul. Deuteronomy 23:18, God says not to bring the earnings of a male or a female prostitute into the temple to pay any vow for this is an abomination to the Lord your God. So even with Christians, they often say, just make me all the money I can make and I'll be generous with it. I say, no, but the Bible has principles about how we should make our money. And, we have a sales team. And right now we have about 75 employees and we're planning to hire another 25 employees in the coming year. And, what I've asked our sales team to do is to lead with the mission and values, not to lead with performance. So that means prospecting for financial advisors and for clients that would resonate with the mission and values of the company. If a person doesn't resonate and they're with us just for performance, those are not clients we want anyway, because what happens if we have 2 bad months of performance? They're going to leave. But if a person comes in because they identify with the mission and values, they're generally better long-term investors and clients for us. So it's just better business to lead with mission and values and not with performance.
I'll just ask some common questions else that we would be facing. Can you hear me?
You're not on mute, but for some reason it didn't come through.
Am I audible?
Should I read it?
Yeah, we can hear you, Jobin.
Okay, Ruben, so we'll just take, there are some common questions.
Just a second.
Wait, I actually, go ahead. I could hear you now. It
Okay.
seems like yeah.
Okay, so we have some else common questions apart from the pigeonhole. Most of us work in different companies where, especially probably based in the West, and they do promote different value systems that on the broader terms of inclusion and diversity, so-called, and employees are being promoted and asked to, stand up to these promotional things, which probably include many of the things that you had earlier mentioned that as a company that wouldn't be stepped in. So it's probably like being like Daniel in the Babylon world. How do we, as employees in different companies, when we see probably a lot of the biblical values are not reflecting, and you're not in a position as a decision maker to shift turns, how do you respond in companies?
Yeah, so as you're working in these companies as a Christian, as much as possible, try to win over the management and the leadership of the company. And generally, people are won over through our good work and our character. And as they see that more and more in us, if we just go around the company and start calling people sinners, most likely it's not going to end well, right? Most likely we're going to end up getting fired. And but what we can do is to share our personal convictions and to share where that conviction comes from. If we could speak to management of companies from a place of inclusion, as I said earlier, and not from a place of exclusion, the conversations usually go better. So if you go to management and say, hey, I don't like this thing, and what this person is preaching or what you're promoting is really is bad. I don't agree with it. Generally, that doesn't work as well as if you go to the company and say, hey, can you consider my perspective as a person of faith, as a Christian? And I would assume that Muslims and even Hindus, many Hindus would have these same values. Can you also consider these values? As a Christian, here are my values. I think if you are asking the company to be more inclusive, companies tend to hear that more than if you're asking the company to be exclusive towards somebody else.
Thanks. We are a bit towards the closing time, so I'll probably pause on the questions for now. Anything you want to give us a closing remark before you end?
No, I just wanted to encourage all of you. I hope this was a blessing. In Corinthians, Paul says, in whatever you do, honor God, right? Glorify God. Whether you eat or drink or whatever you do it for the glory of God. So as Christians in the marketplace, as Christians in universities that are thinking about marketplace, for some of you, God will call you into full-time ministry. But for some of you, God is calling you into the marketplace. Don't think of yourself as like not called. Don't think of yourself as a second-class citizens in God's economy. Really take the view that God is calling you. Pray about it. If God is calling you into medicine, if God is calling you into engineering or whatever, God is calling you into that. Pray for that calling. Pray for that clarity, and then honor God in your work. Don't be discouraged as as you're going about your work. If you're honoring God and being faithful, God is happy with you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ruben, for being with us this evening. Really appreciate your time and sharing your thoughts. I would like to especially thank again all of you who have joined, and especially want to, if anyone of you are new to WCC, and if you look forward to be connected with us, I'm just sharing a link. Please do go up and fill up your details. We look forward to be connected. We have our Sunday services at 10:30 English, and we also have our Hindi services at the moment happening in the evenings. We do have midweek meetings else being happening across the city. So if at all you would like to be connected, please do share up your details. We host monthly youth connects like this on some of these kind of contents and topics. I would also probably add in from what Ruben was mentioning. When he was talking about the urge the Lord put into him, he waited and prayed. Last week, our pastor was sharing on a similar night when Nehemiah had the burden about rebuilding the temple, rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem. You see, for 4 months, he took time to pray and ask the Lord for leading. And you see on how God anointed him and gave him directions to build up the wall. We are the wall. Each one of us in different companies are the missionaries God has ordained and sent. And it's our prayer that God would anoint us, that we would share his good love to many of them who are in the dark. We might be as someone told, we might be the holy gospel that many would actually see or ever read. So may God help us and anoint us to go forward.